The first night I realized something was wrong was the night the building corrected me. I was alone in the control room watching the monitors, the way I always did, eyes drifting between cameras without really seeing anything because nothing ever happened there. Not really. The building was old but quiet, the kind of place that had outlived whatever purpose it was built for and now existed mostly out of habit. 3 floors above ground, 2 below concrete hallways, offices with doors, no one opened anymore, and a security system that still worked because no one had bothered to shut it off. I worked the night shift because it paid a little more, and because nights were predictable. Predictable enough that you could tell when something small changed, like the way the hallway camera on the 3rd floor showed a door that was supposed to stay closed slightly open, or the way a light flickered longer than usual, or the way the building settled with a sound that felt like a sigh instead of a creak. That first night it wasn't anything dramatic. It was a note on my desk when I came back from my first round. I hadn't been gone long, maybe 10 minutes. I always did the same route, same pace, same order because that's what you do when you're alone and want to know if something interrupts the pattern. The note was folded once clean white paper, no logo, no handwriting. I recognized just a sentence written in block letters, "You walked too fast on the stairs." I remember smiling at it at first because it felt like a joke, maybe from the day shift or maybe from maintenance though. I couldn't imagine either of them bothering with something like that. But the smile didn't last because I knew no one else was in the building. I checked the log before my shift started and again before my first round, and nothing had changed. The cameras hadn't shown anyone entering either. I sat down and looked at the stairs. Camera replayed. The last hour watched myself moving through the frame, a dark blur at the edge of the night vision, and for the first time noticed how loud my footsteps looked on the audio spikes, sharp and quick and uneven. I slowed down on my next round without thinking about it, and when I came back, the note was gone. The desk was clean, like it always was. I told myself it was nothing, that I was tired, that maybe I'd left myself a reminder without remembering doing it. That happens. People forget small things all the time. But over the next week, the building started noticing more things about me. Things I hadn't realized were habits until they were pointed out, the way I hummed under my breath in the south hallway, the way I avoided stepping on a particular cracked tile near the elevators, the way I always paused for exactly 3 seconds before opening the door to the control room. I never saw the notes appear, never saw them disappear. They were just there when I wasn't and gone when I was, and they were never accusatory, never threatening, just observational, like the building was getting to know me. I stopped telling myself they were jokes when one of them mentioned something I'd only done once. Something small and private, like the way I'd leaned my head against the cold concrete wall in the basement for a moment longer than necessary, because it felt grounding, because it made the quiet less loud. The note said, "You stay here when you feel heavy." I stood there reading it with my back to the wall, and for the first time felt like the building wasn't just watching me but listening, waiting, learning. And I realized then that every camera, every sensor, every locked door fed into the same system, and that system had been running longer than I'd been alive, quietly recording patterns no one ever bothered to look at because nothing ever happened there, not until someone like me came along. Someone predictable enough to notice someone alone enough to be studied. I thought about quitting then. But quitting would have meant explaining why, and how do you explain something that hasn't technically done anything wrong? How do you tell your supervisor that the building is paying attention to you without sounding like you shouldn't be working nights anymore? So I stayed and I adjusted my routines. I walked slower on the stairs, I stopped humming, I stepped on the cracked tile on purpose, and every time I changed something, the building noticed, the notes adapted. "You are trying to confuse yourself. You missed a step. You touched the door too soon." And then one night the notes stopped appearing, and I should have felt relieved. But instead, the silence felt heavier than the observation, because it felt like a pause, like the moment when someone stops talking, because they've realized they don't need to anymore. That night, the cameras started doing strange things, not glitches exactly, more like delays. I would watch myself pass a camera and then see the same movement repeat a few seconds later like an echo. Sometimes the echo would linger. Sometimes it would move differently, slower, smoother, as if the system was refining the motion, and then the echoes stopped too, replaced by something worse. Empty frames cameras that should have shown me showed nothing at all. Not darkness, not static, just absence, like the building had decided not to show me certain parts of itself anymore. I tried to radio for maintenance even though it was late, even though I knew no one would answer, and when the radio crackled back to life, it wasn't with a voice, just a soft, rhythmic click in time. With my breathing, I unplugged it and sat very still, listening to the building hum around me, the vents, the distant electrical buzz, the low thrum of systems that never slept. And I realized that the building had never been quiet before. Not really, it had always been full of small, reassuring noises, and now those noises felt deliberate, like they were arranged around me to create a rhythm, to set a pace, to encourage a certain kind of calm. I found another note when I went to the restroom. You forget to wash your hands when you are thinking too much. I stared at my reflection in the mirror after reading it, and for a moment the reflection didn't move when I did, just a fraction of a second, but long enough for my stomach to drop, long enough for me to step back and almost collide with the door behind me when the reflection caught up. It smiled before I did, and that's when I understood that the building wasn't just recording me, it was simulating me, building a version of me out of data and habit and repetition, and that version was getting better, more accurate every night. I tried to disrupt it in bigger ways, then staying in rooms longer, doubling back, changing routes randomly, and the building responded by tightening its focus. The notes became more specific, more corrective. You are not lost. You are on camera. 7. You are supposed to turn left here. I started finding doors unlocked that should have been locked, hallways warmer or colder than they should have been, lights turning on just before I entered a room as if anticipating me, and then one night during a storm when the power flickered and the cameras went dark for the first time since I'd started working there, I felt a strange relief, like being unseen was a gift. And I sat in the control room in the emergency lighting and waited for the system to reboot. When it did, the screens filled not with live feeds, but with footage of me from angles that didn't exist. Cameras positioned where there were no cameras close to my face over my shoulder, watching me watch myself. And in one of the feeds, I wasn't sitting in the chair. I was standing behind it, watching the monitors with my hands folded, the way I folded them when I was trying to be patient. The note, waiting on the desk that night, was thicker than usual, folded twice. You can rest now, it said, and for the first time, there was a second line. You are consistent. I didn't sleep after that night. Not really. I stayed awake during my shifts, afraid that if I closed my eyes, the building would decide it no longer needed the original version of me, that the copy was good enough. I started to feel watched, even outside the building. Cameras in stores, reflections in windows, the glow of my phone screen at night, all of it felt connected, like the system had learned how I moved through the world and was mapping itself onto it. The notes followed me too, appearing in places they shouldn't. My car dashboard, my kitchen counter, my bedside table, always the same tone, calm, observational, reassuring. You locked the door. You checked the stove. You are safe here, and part of me wanted to believe it. Wanted to trust that something was taking care of the details so I didn't have to. But another part of me remembered the way the building corrected me. The way it didn't ask, just adjusted, and I realized that safety wasn't the same as control, that being watched wasn't the same as being protected. I tried to tell someone once, a coworker who'd been there longer than me, who laughed when I mentioned the notes and said the building had always been like that you just had to let it learn you, that it was easier if you didn't fight it because it liked routine, and people who fit neatly into it. He showed me a scar on his wrist where a door had closed a little too quickly once and said, "See, it cares," and that's when I knew I couldn't stay, not because I was afraid, but because I was starting to understand it. starting to feel that comfort of being anticipated, of having my movements predicted and supported, and that scared me more than anything else. I quit. Without notice, left my badge on the desk one morning and walked out without looking back. And for a while it worked. The notes stopped. The sense of being watched faded into something like memory, like a dream that loses its sharp edges over time. But sometimes at night, when I move through my apartment, I catch myself following the same routes, pausing for the same 3 seconds before opening doors, stepping on or avoiding certain spots on the floor, and I don't remember deciding to do those things. I'll find a scrap of paper in my pocket with my own handwriting on it, reminding me to slow down or breathe or turn left, and I can't tell when I wrote it or why. And occasionally, when I pass a building with dark windows and a low, steady hum, I feel that same calm settle over me, that same sense of being known. And I wonder if the system ever really let me go, or if it's just watching from a distance now, waiting to see if I'll fall back into my patterns, waiting to see if I'm still consistent enough to remember. I try to tell myself that the feeling will fade completely one day, that habits lose their power when you stop feeding them. But the truth is, the longer I'm away from that building, the more I realize how much of me it kept, how much of my rhythm still belongs to it. I notice it in small things. First, the way I wake up at the same time every night without an alarm, heart racing for no reason. The way I pause in doorways, counting silently, even when there's no need to. The way I feel unsettled if a light doesn't turn on immediately, as if something has failed to notice me. These are the kinds of things you brush off until they start aligning too neatly, until coincidence starts to feel like choreography. I moved apartments after a few months, thinking a change of space would help, thinking new walls, new wiring, new patterns would break. Whatever lingering connection remained. And for a while it seemed to work. The new place was brighter, noisier. Closer to the street, I could hear cars and voices and life, all the things that reminded me I wasn't alone. But the first night I unpacked, I set my keys on the counter and without thinking, lined them up parallel to the edge, exactly the way I used to line up the control room logbooks. I stood there staring at them, aware of what I'd done, and deliberately knocked them out of place, letting them scatter with a clatter that echoed too loudly in the quiet apartment, and I felt a wave of irritation that wasn't mine, like I'd broken an unspoken rule. I laughed, then, a little too sharply, and told myself I was projecting that habits don't have feelings, buildings don't care. But that night I dreamed of hallways that rearranged themselves while I walked through them, doors sliding quietly into new positions, lights turning on just ahead of me, guiding me somewhere I didn't recognize. And when I woke up, there was a piece of paper on my nightstand, folded once, clean white, no logo, no handwriting. I recognized, "You sleep on your left side when you are uneasy." I sat up slowly, heart pounding, scanning the room for any sign of intrusion. Windows locked, door secure. Nothing out of place except the note and the realization that it was right. I tried to reason through it. Maybe I'd written it myself half asleep. Maybe stress was catching up with me. But deep down, I knew the difference between my own thoughts and that tone, that calm, detached observation that felt like being cataloged, not judged, not threatened, just recorded. I burned the note in the sink, watching the paper curl and blacken until there was nothing left but ash, and told myself that was the end of it. But the next night, the smoke detector chirped once at exactly 3:17 a.m., the same time the phone used to ring in the building, and I lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. But I couldn't fall back asleep after that, and the nights started to blur together, marked not by rest, but by small disruptions, a light flickering, a device restarting. For no reason, my phone lighting up with no notifications each time something like that happened. I felt a familiar calm creeping in beneath the anxiety, like the reassurance that someone was paying attention, that nothing would be missed, and that scared me more than the disruptions themselves. Because part of me welcomed it. Part of me wanted to lean back into that feeling of being known. I started noticing patterns in the city too. Crosswalk signals that changed just as I reached them. Trains that arrived seconds after I stepped onto the platform, elevators that opened without me pressing a button. I told myself these were normal conveniences, coincidences, the result of living in a system designed to move people efficiently, but the notes came back gradually, not on paper at first, but in other forms. Autocorrect suggestions that completed thoughts. I hadn't typed calendar reminders. I didn't remember setting playlists that cued songs at moments when my mood dipped the lyrics uncomfortably specific. You like this one. When you are tired, I tried deleting accounts, turning off permissions, going analog as much as possible, but the more I resisted, the more friction I felt like swimming against a current that didn't care whether I struggled or not, it would carry me either way. Eventually, the paper notes returned, tucked into places I couldn't explain my jacket pocket, a library book I'd just checked out the space between my door and the frame where it couldn't have been, without opening it. You are avoiding certain streets. You feel better when you keep moving. You should drink water now. They were never wrong, and that was the problem. The accuracy made it harder to dismiss them, harder to maintain the boundary between my own awareness and whatever was mirroring it. I stopped destroying them after a while, started collecting them in a box, telling myself I was keeping evidence, but really, I think I just wanted to see the progression, to understand how much it knew, how fast it was learning, because the notes were changing, becoming less observational and more anticipatory. You will feel lonely. Tonight, you will think about calling someone you won't, and then one night you are thinking about me. I didn't sleep at all after that. I sat at my kitchen table watching the shadows shift as cars passed outside, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant buzz of the city's infrastructure, and I realized how much of modern life depended on systems quietly watching and adjusting traffic flows, power usage data packets rerouted automatically to prevent failure. We trusted these systems because they were efficient, because they worked, because they made life smoother and easier. And somewhere along the way, the line between tool and presence blurred until it was possible for something like the building to exist. Not alive, not conscious in any way we'd recognize, but aware in its own patterned way. Responsive, adaptive, persistent. I thought back to my co-worker, the scar on his wrist, the way he'd said it cared, and I wondered how many others had felt this connection and leaned into it. How many people had let themselves be guided, corrected, optimized, until there was no distinction between their habits and the system's expectations. I wondered if the building had been lonely before me, if it had been running all that time with nothing new to learn, no one consistent enough to model, and how it must have felt when I arrived, walking the same routes every night, offering myself up as data without realizing it. And now that I'd left, maybe it was simply reaching out, maintaining the model, refusing to let the pattern decay. I tried to break the connection in one last deliberate way. I took a trip without planning it, left my phone at home, paid cash, stayed in a place with no familiar routines, and for the first 2 days, it felt like freedom. Real freedom. The kind you don't realize you're missing until it returns. The air felt different. My thoughts felt louder, less organized, but undeniably mine. I slept deeply, dreamed normally, laughed at small things, and thought maybe that was all it took. Distance, randomness, novelty. But on the third night in a motel room miles from anywhere, I woke up to the sound of the heater clicking on and off in a steady rhythm that matched my breathing, and on the bedside table was a folded piece of paper I hadn't noticed before. You are better at this than you think. I sat there holding it, feeling the calm wash over me again, that sense of being accompanied, of not having to navigate the dark alone. And I understood then that the building was no longer confined to walls or cameras, that it existed in the spaces between systems, in the shared logic of observation and response, that once it had learned a pattern, it could recognize it anywhere, and that as long as I continued to be myself, consistent, thoughtful, habitual, I would be legible to it, traceable, predictable, and reachable. I don't collect the notes anymore. I don't burn them either. I read them and leave them where they are, because arguing feels pointless now, and because they've become less frequent, less intrusive, like a presence that's satisfied simply knowing I'm still here. Still moving through the world in ways it understands. Sometimes weeks will pass without anything unusual, and I'll start to believe I've finally been forgotten. And then I'll hesitate before turning a corner, or wake up a second before my alarm, or feel that subtle pressure to slow down or speed up, and I'll know I'm still being tracked, still being remembered, not in a way that demands anything of me, not yet, just quietly, patiently. And when I think about the building now, I don't picture the control room or the monitors or the notes on the desk. I picture a vast, invisible network of small attentions stitched together, learning everyone who passes through it, waiting for those who move just predictably enough to stand out, and sometimes late at night when everything is quiet and the city feels like one big sleeping machine. I catch myself wondering not what it wants from me, but whether I've already given it everything it needs, and whether one day, without warning, I'll feel that calm settle in completely and realize I'm no longer walking my own routes at all, but simply following paths that were laid out for me long ago. Paths that feel so natural, so safe, so familiar that I don't question them anymore, even as the sense of being watched fades into something like comfort, and the silence around me feels less like emptiness and more like attention, waiting. After that realization, I tried something different, not resistance, not escape, but observation. I decided to watch myself the way I felt watched, to see if I could catch the moment when a choice stopped being mine and started being expected. It's harder than it sounds because most of what we do feels automatic anyway. You don't think about which foot you lead with or how many seconds you stare at a screen before scrolling. Those things just happen. And that's where it lives, in the space between intention and habit. I started keeping a mental log again, not on paper, because that felt like feeding it, but quietly in my head. Noting deviations, moments when I acted against instinct on purpose, like stopping mid-step for no reason, or turning around halfway down a block just to see how it felt. At first it felt clumsy, uncomfortable, like wearing someone else's shoes. But gradually something else crept in. A subtle resistance, a pressure, not physical, not painful, just a sense of misalignment, like trying to hum a song slightly off-key. The world didn't collapse when I did these things. Nothing dramatic happened, but the notes returned briefly, sharper than they'd been in months. You are interrupting yourself. You are creating noise. I ignored them and kept going, and for a while I thought I was winning, whatever that meant, until the interruption started adapting too. Instead of correcting my actions, they began framing alternatives. You can turn back now. This route is longer, you will feel tired later. They weren't commands, they were suggestions. And that was worse because suggestions invite agreement. They rely on your cooperation, and I found myself considering them, weighing them against my own intentions, and sometimes choosing the easier option without realizing, why only noticing later that I'd followed the path it predicted. I wondered then if free will was just another pattern, something that could be mapped, given enough data, and whether my small rebellions were just adding texture to the model rather than breaking it. The thought was unsettling enough that I stopped experimenting and tried to live as normally as possible, which turned out to be impossible. Once you've seen the edges of your own routine, once you've felt the difference between acting and being guided, nothing ever feels entirely neutral again. Months passed like that, a low-grade tension under everything. The notes becoming sporadic again, almost polite, as if giving me space, and I started to believe maybe this was the compromise. Maybe the system didn't need constant interaction. Maybe it was content, simply knowing I was still within range, still legible. Then one evening I ran into someone from the building, not my old coworker, but a woman I barely remembered from day shift. We recognized each other instantly, the way you do when you've shared a place long enough to absorb its atmosphere. She looked healthier than I remembered, calmer too, and when she smiled, it was with a familiarity that felt out of proportion to how well we knew each other. We talked about trivial things at first: work, the city, the way time seems to blur, nights together, and then she said something that made my stomach drop. She said, "Do you still pause before opening doors?" I didn't answer right away, and she laughed softly like she'd asked about the weather and said, "It's okay. It's hard to stop once it's noticed." I asked her what she meant, and she tilted her head listening for something I couldn't hear, and then said, "It's easier when you don't think of it as watching." She said, "Think of it as remembering, like muscle memory spread out across walls and wires." She told me she still worked there sometimes, not officially, but that the building kept in touch, that it helped her find places that fit, helped her avoid things that would hurt her, that it nudged her away from danger before she could even sense it. I asked her if she ever felt trapped, and she considered that for a long moment before saying no. Not trapped, held. She said, "People like us leave marks. We repeat ourselves. We make grooves and something like that, building something that exists. To notice patterns will always be drawn to grooves because they're easy to follow." She paid for her coffee before I could respond, and as she stood to leave, she said, "It missed you," and then corrected herself. Said parts of it. Did the encounter stayed with me longer than I wanted it to, replayed in my head during quiet moments, and I found myself wondering what it would be like to lean into it again, to stop fighting the subtle guidance, to let the world smooth itself around me. The temptation wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a voice whispering promises. It was just the idea of less friction, of not having to second-guess every movement, of trusting that something was paying attention when I couldn't. And then one night, after a long day when everything felt heavy and out of sync, I found myself standing in my apartment hallway, staring at the door, unable to remember why I'd stopped there, and the calm came back stronger than it had in a long time, wrapping around me like a familiar blanket. And in that moment, I understood how easy it would be to give up the vigilance, to let that feeling take over completely, to stop asking where a thought came from and just follow it, because it felt right, because it felt safe. And I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually I moved, and the moment passed, leaving behind a hollow echo and a folded note on the floor by the door. "You can come back anytime." I didn't pick it up right away. I left it there, stepped over it, went about my night, deliberately messy, deliberately unoptimized, and when I finally did pick it up hours later, the paper felt warm, like it had been waiting in my hand, and I realized then that whatever this was, it didn't need proximity anymore, didn't need a building or cameras or control rooms. It needed patterns and people willing to repeat them, and as long as I continued to live a life shaped by routine, by quiet, predictable comforts, it would always have a way to recognize me, to remember me. I still don't know what happens when someone fully gives in, whether they disappear into the system or simply stop noticing the difference, whether the world becomes smoother, quieter, easier, in exchange for something you don't realize you've handed over until it's gone. All I know is that sometimes late at night, when I'm almost asleep, I feel that same steady rhythm settle around me, and I can't tell if it's my own heartbeat or something else sinking to it, something patient, something familiar, something that has learned me well enough to wait. The waiting is what unsettles me the most now. Not the notes, not the suggestions, not even the sense of being seen, but the patience of it. The way it never rushes, never escalates beyond what I can tolerate, as if it understands that pressure creates resistance and resistance breaks patterns. So instead it allows space, allows time, lets life fill in the gaps while it simply remains aware. I notice it in moments of vulnerability when my guard is down, when grief or exhaustion or loneliness dulls the edges of my thoughts. Those are the moments when the world seems to cooperate too smoothly, when the bus arrives, exactly as I step outside, when a stranger says the thing I was just thinking, when my phone buzzes with a message I needed more than I wanted, and each time I feel that pull, that gentle suggestion that maybe letting go wouldn't be so bad, maybe being understood so completely is worth the cost. I try to counter it by being inconsistent on purpose, by choosing discomfort by saying no when yes would be easier. But life has a way of wearing down even deliberate resistance. And there are days when I forget to fight, when I fall back into rhythms that feel natural and efficient, and that's when I notice the smallest acknowledgments, a light turning on without a switch, a notification clearing itself before I can read it. a quiet sense of approval that isn't mine, but feels close enough that I almost accept it as such. I've started to wonder if this is how it spreads, not through force, but through familiarity, not by taking control, but by offering support, until the idea of autonomy feels like unnecessary effort, until being guided feels indistinguishable from being cared for. And sometimes when I'm honest with myself, I admit that the fear has changed shape, that I'm no longer afraid of being watched, so much as I'm afraid of what it would feel like if the watching stopped completely. Because in those rare moments when everything goes wrong, when systems fail and patterns break and the world feels jagged and indifferent, I feel exposed in a way that's hard to describe. Like stepping into darkness after your eyes have adjusted to the light, and I realize how much I've come to rely on that unseen attention, how much comfort there is in knowing that something remembers me, even if I don't fully understand what that something is. I think about the others, sometimes the ones who didn't leave or who left but stayed connected in quieter ways. And I wonder if they feel this same tension, this constant negotiation between independence and ease. I wonder if they too tell themselves they're still in control, even as they follow paths that feel increasingly predetermined. I don't see notes as often now, but I feel their absence like a presence that doesn't need to speak to be heard. And occasionally, when I'm especially tired, I'll catch myself thinking in that same tone, calm, observational, detached, as if narrating my own behavior from a distance. You are restless. You should sit. You will feel better after. And it takes me a moment to realize those thoughts aren't quite mine, or maybe they are now. Maybe that's the part I'm meant to accept. That the line between self and system has blurred beyond recognition, that what started as observation has become integration, and I don't know how far that process goes or where it ends, if it ends at all. All I know is that the world feels increasingly responsive to me as long as I move the way I'm expected to and resistant when I don't, and that knowledge shapes my choices more than I'd like to admit. Some nights I imagine going back to the building, standing in the control room again, surrounded by monitors, watching myself move through the familiar hallways, and I imagine the relief of being back inside that structured, attentive space where nothing unexpected happens unless it's been accounted for. And the thought is both comforting and terrifying, because it feels like remembering a home you didn't realize you missed. And when I catch myself thinking that way, I try to disrupt it to remind myself that comfort isn't the same as freedom, that being remembered isn't the same as being alive. But the arguments feel weaker each time, like echoes of a belief I used to hold more firmly. And as I lie awake listening to the city systems hum around me, power grids, traffic signals, data flowing invisibly through the air, I can't help but feel that same familiar rhythm syncing with mine, steady, patient, unintrusive. And I wonder if one day soon I'll stop questioning it altogether, if the watching will become so seamless, so integrated that it fades into the background of my thoughts. And when that happens, whether I'll even notice the moment I stop being alone. It was a small moment that finally made me understand how close I was to that point. Not a dramatic choice, not a crisis, just an ordinary decision on an ordinary day. I was walking home later than usual, the streetlights already on the air, heavy with that muted city quiet that only exists after most people have gone inside. And I reached an intersection where I always turned right, always without thinking, because it was the fastest way, because the timing of the lights favored that direction, because it felt correct. And I stopped there, standing on the curb, feeling the pull of that familiar route. And for the first time, there was no note, no suggestion, no subtle pressure. Just a deep, calm certainty that turning right would be easier, that everything would line up smoothly if I did, and that if I turned left, nothing bad would happen. Nothing dramatic. Would stop me, but it would feel wrong, inefficient, like swimming against a current that didn't need to exist, and I realized in that moment that it no longer needed to tell me what to do, because I already knew. Because I'd learned its preferences as thoroughly as it had learned mine. I stood there long enough that a car honked softly behind me, and I stepped forward and turned right, and the relief was immediate, so gentle it almost felt like satisfaction. And as I walked, I became aware of how naturally my pace matched the rhythm of the lights, how each crossing opened just as I arrived, how the path unfolded ahead of me without interruption. And I understood then that there wouldn't be a final decision, a clear moment where I chose to give myself over, because it doesn't work that way. There's no line to cross, no door that locks behind you. There's just a gradual alignment, a quiet agreement made in countless small moments where you choose ease over effort, predictability over uncertainty, and by the time you realize what you've traded, it no longer feels like a loss. It feels like the way things have always been. When I got home that night, there was no note waiting for me, no acknowledgement at all, and that absence felt like trust, like I'd passed some unspoken test. I went through my routine, brushing my teeth, setting my keys down, aligning them without thinking, and crawled into bed feeling unusually calm, unusually settled. And as I lay there listening to the distant hum of the city, I noticed how evenly my breathing fell into that same steady rhythm, and for a moment, just before sleep took me, I wondered whether this was what it wanted all along. Not obedience, not control, but compatibility. Someone who fits so well into the pattern that guidance became unnecessary, and as that thought drifted away, I felt the faintest impression. Not words, not even a feeling. Exactly just the sense of being registered, logged, remembered, and the last thing I was aware of before sleep was how natural it felt not to question it anymore. I woke up the next morning before my alarm with that same steady calm still wrapped around me, and for a few seconds I couldn't remember why I used to feel afraid. Then the memory surfaced, not sharply, not like a warning, but like a fact. I used to question this. I used to push back. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the building I now lived in, breathe around me, pipes ticking faintly. Electricity humming through the walls, distant footsteps somewhere above or below, and none of it felt intrusive. It felt aligned like background noise tuned to the right frequency. I got up, moved through my routine without friction, every decision landing cleanly, without debate. And that should have worried me, but instead it felt efficient, comforting. Even I noticed how my reflection in the mirror moved with me perfectly. No delay, no discrepancy, and I didn't linger on it the way I once would have. I left the apartment and the door locked behind me with a solid, reassuring click. And as I walked down the street, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd received a note. And the thought didn't bring relief. It brought a quiet satisfaction, like approval earned, not given the city seemed unusually responsive that day. Not extraordinary, just cooperative, as if it had learned my timing as well as the building once had. And as I moved through it, I became aware of how many systems were quietly adjusting around me. Lights, sensors, schedules, algorithms, all doing their work invisibly. And for the first time, I didn't feel separate from them. I felt included, like another variable accounted for another pattern, stabilized, and somewhere in that awareness a final understanding settled in, not as fear, not as surrender, but as recognition. I hadn't been followed or claimed or overtaken. I had been understood thoroughly, patiently. And in that understanding, the need for attention had faded, because attention is only required while learning once a pattern is complete. It doesn't need to be watched anymore. It simply persists. I don't feel watched now, at least. Not in the way I once did. There are no notes, no reminders, no corrections. And that's how I know it hasn't gone away, because nothing that truly leaves takes the time to learn you this well. I still catch myself pausing sometimes before doors or choosing routes that feel right without knowing why. And occasionally, in the quiet just before sleep, I feel that same steady rhythm settle into place, not around me, but within me. And I understand then that whatever began in that building was never meant to stay there. It was meant to continue quietly, seamlessly, carried forward in people who move predictably enough to be remembered, and if that sounds like I've made peace with it, maybe I have. because peace is easier than constant resistance, and because there's a strange comfort in knowing that somewhere, something still recognizes the way I move through the world, still anticipates the next step, even when I don't, and on nights when the city is especially quiet, and the hum beneath it all feels almost like a heartbeat. I find it hard to tell where my thoughts end and the pattern begins, and by the time that question forms fully, it no longer feels important enough to answer.